Welcome, everybody. We have a very special week for you. We have a returning guest, which is actually rare for us, but we just adore Dr. Lisa Strohman, who is a psychologist, an attorney, an author, a mother who established Digital Citizen Academy, DCAkids.org, to help keep families safe from online dangers. Her background working as a visiting scholar with the profiling unit at the FBI during one of the most tragic school shootings in the U.S. helped create her passion to help proactively prevent and educate students, educators, and parents on the issues related to technology. Mm-hmm. And we're going to talk about, kids are home now.
You're right.
And technology use has gone way up.
They're on their devices too much.
We all are.
They're using the devices, and they've done this for a long time, but now parents have to work. So the devices are now becoming babysitters.
Yeah.
And so welcome, Lisa. It's so great to see you again.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
And what do you think COVID-19 is doing to the mental health of the kids in America?
Well, I think that the kids, the parents, the educators, I think business leaders, I think everybody is impacted from an emotional standpoint. I'm in my clinical practice with my teens and my kids, anxiety, depression, just overall stress. So it doesn't have to have a clinical diagnosis for it to impact us, but it is not a normal situation to have to be quarantined and secluded from people who bring you joy, support, just emotional balance. So we're seeing a lot of issues psychologically that have been interesting to me, because those people who haven't had any sort of symptoms now are jumping in and saying, hey, what is this? I don't know what this feeling is.
Yeah, no question. The isolation, the loneliness. And so more and more people are turning to online ways to feel better. And
right.
Your work has demonstrated that's not always the best strategy. So how can parents keep kids safe during the pandemic? I mean, we know don't go out, don't go in groups. If you go to the store now, you should be wearing a mask.
And are you seeing something different during this time than you've seen before? Like, is there something special we should be paying attention? I actually feel like our kids, my two nieces and my daughter, are on their phone, they're on their devices less because we're home. But we're keeping them busy. But we're here more than normal, and they're with us more than normal, where they're normally with their friends more and at school and stuff like that. But my question to you at some point during our 4 episodes together, are you seeing something different during this time coming up on social media that we need to be aware of for kids?
Absolutely. I think that what I really see is opportunists taking advantage of it. And I think that from an educational standpoint, we are trying to keep the meter moving so that our school-age kids are moving forward and getting the content that they need so they progress into the next year. And so it's a difference between maybe being in a community where it's a one-to-one device and the kids are getting access to their teachers, they can get content, versus an inner city school district that doesn't have any technology, and they're getting a packet of papers that might be 20, and then they're closing the school and that's it for the year. So the differential is really interesting. Just the nerdy scientist in me is looking at this and saying there are a lot of parents that are paying attention to it, but we also have to balance in, is it academic, creative, thoughtful use of technology, or is it going down the rabbit hole and trying to see if we can watch everything on Netflix, including Tiger King, that I'm pretty sure nobody would have watched had we not been in a pandemic.
Don't get me started. Do not get me started.
That is like the best psychiatric show.
I hate it so much.
There's so much psychiatry.
I can't watch. It's like a train wreck. I just can't watch it. I just cannot.
So my world is a bit like that. Like I'm looking at these families and I'm peering in. So they're bringing me into their worlds and they're saying, you know, my kids are punching holes in the wall, or they're really acting out because they might be gaming too long, which you both know, it just lights up that brain and gets them really aggressive and unregulated. And so they're not figuring out maybe that those are attached as soon as they need to. So that's what we're trying to do, obviously, with this podcast, is like just talk about how increased use will, in fact, impact us behaviorally, emotionally, physically, all of those things.
dcakids.org to learn. Tell us a little bit more of your origin story. Why did you get interested in online security for kids?
So my first steps into the world was as a child myself, having been introduced to one of the first video game platforms at the Xbox. Look at how young I'm pretending to be, the Atari. And I remember I couldn't turn it off. So I have that addictive potential. My grandmother talked to me about it. And then fast forward, I learned that about myself, got into the area of looking at forensics, human behavior, motivation. And that's when I applied to be part of the honors internship program with the FBI. And I was very fortunate to have been placed within the profiling unit in Quantico. I worked in, at the time, CASCU, so it's pre 9/11, but it was Child Abduction Serial Killer Unit. So that's all we did. I started having night terrors. It was some of the most horrendous work. And I remember thinking our biggest fear was really looking at the abductions that these predators could do in vans, cars, around bus stops. There was like a geographic limitation on it. And so fast forward, I was there doing my PhD, and that's when Columbine happened. Mm-hmm. And it really unfolded how the internet was giving access not only to our kids to put things out there and communicate and share their unedited thoughts, but it was literally a two-way conduit. So these predators now could go after our kids in communication, in thought control, in grooming and luring. So that's really where I remember as a PhD student looking at this and saying the science behind technology and psychology hasn't been discussed. And so I was really kind of at the bleeding edge ahead of where we are today. And thankfully we're catching up.
Well, and when we come back, I want to talk more about the psychology of technology and how important it is for parents, but also for adults to understand, because I believe these devices were created to be addictive. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are here with Dr. Lisa Strohman. It's just so important during the pandemic, but actually for the rest of this child's life.
If you have not caught her previous episodes with us, please listen to them. They are so amazing.
And she also has a great TED Talk as well. So let's talk about the psychology of technology. I became horrified as a child psychiatrist when they unleashed this technology on our society with virtually no neuroscience study or no psychological study. And just like you said, 1987, Atari came into my house. My son was 11, and he wouldn't stop with it. I'm like, you can play for half an hour. This is so cool. I didn't have cool toys like this but he wouldn't stop. And he went from being an A student to a B and C student with a lot more fighting at home, at which point I took it out of the house. And I'm like, no, you want to play at your friend's house? That's up to you, but we're not doing this. over and over and over again. I mean, clearly it was going to a bad pattern. And then in 1997, Nintendo produced a Pokemon cartoon in Japan where there was an explosion on the cartoon of red, white, and yellow lights at 4.5 flashes per second, which is actually a seizure frequency. And all of a sudden, 729 Japanese children went to the emergency room with new onset seizures. And I'm like, okay, somebody should be paying attention. We cannot unleash this technology on unsuspecting, developing minds without somebody saying stop. And you had talked about, your experience with Atari. Teach us more about the psychology behind technology.
So, I mean, it's very calculated. I think that when you look at even back before we had big gaming platforms and things like that, it's like we were creating interface in the business world where licenses happened and we only had access. And so it's been this evolution where we are creating dependency upon the technology in very, to me, like very suspicious ways. So in school systems, for instance, like we're granting and giving kids access to Google Suite or, Chromebooks or, and so, but you look at that and you're creating a consumer for life. And so you're getting them trained upon those platforms. So the psychology of it is, as a parent, and I'm in the field, right? I had no choice. My child was given a Gmail account, and they said, don't worry, you can go in, create a family account. I talked to all these parents. Well, my daughter turned 13 this past week, and I got an email and it said, congratulations, your daughter now has full control of her account. Just wanted to let you know so think about that. So my daughter is competent, capable, but she's an authentic 13-year-old. She doesn't have devices. She's a kid, and we haven't had a conversation, but they just opened it. So what if I had a developmentally challenged child who maybe had a developmental age of 7 and her chronological age gave her 13? There's no thoughtfulness forward on the psychology of how do we make parents aware? How do we understand that the industry is going after our young children for their data, for their patterns, for their loyalty on these platforms? And that's the part that I think it is an unfair battle. Food is the same thing. When I gave my TED Talk, I met somebody who worked for Kellogg's, and she said I was a nutrichemical engineer. And I said, well, what did that mean? And she said, I was creating powders to put on the cereals to make them addictive.
Right.
And so I thought, when she met me, I was talking about how technology laces in these same screen refreshes and colors and all of those things. Those are some of the psychology tricks. Like it's the same exact thing. So, simply turning your phone to grayscale. If you've never done that before, I would say to all of your followers and listeners to try that. If you go into your settings and you turn off the color and make it to grayscale, you will find out very quickly it is not as interesting of an item to look at, because the psychology of how that lights up your brain is very different.
Oh, that's interesting. So I have a question. So we're talking about some of the gaming devices, which I don't know if this is true in other homes, but in our home, we've got my daughter and my 2 nieces, so all girls. They don't have that much interest in those things, but try to take the devices away, their phones, right, and Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. This new thing, TikTok. Okay. And I'm like, whoa. I mean, girls seem to be like dually attached to that. I mean, way more attached to that than anything else. I don't know if there's a difference in genders, what they're attached to and why, but also these new platforms pop up so fast. I feel like they don't even give us time to fully research them. I had actually, by the time my nieces came to live with us, they already had TikTok. And so I was like, I don't know that much about TikTok. I'm not sure about this. And by that, my daughter sees it and she like signs up for an account before I even realize it. And then I find out that you're selling them all of your information, right? So they own all of your information when you sign up for those. And I'm like, wait, I don't like this. And by then they're all completely attached to it. Now you've got a battle on your hands.
Right. And TikTok is an international server, international company. So we have no control. They can edit, they can modify, they can republish it. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So is there a difference in genders? And what about some of these new platforms?
There definitely, there definitely is. I think that, again, girls mature faster than boys. They end up going through puberty a little bit earlier, a little bit younger. The platforms that the girls are going into are all really looking at how do we portray and project ourselves, and how do we get affirmation from the world back. So that part about us that we have that internal affirmation of we're smart, we do the right thing, we present ourselves authentically, isn't really, those character traits really are played upon by the industry, and the girls tend to pick it up first. They put themselves out there in a very sexualized way.
Yes.
Have not seen the filters and how fantastic. One of my friends has a daughter who's on it. She sent me the difference between a filter of her daughter on Snapchat, and if there's a way to interlay it to you, I will. But it is incredibly different from what she really looks like to where it is. So it's the sexualization. And then, of course, now you come along and they've really mastered it. The girls are like reinforcing each other and all that stuff. And then these poor boys come walking in who have boy brains, and they have testosterone that gets popped in, and now they have all these girls that are placing themselves out there on these very visually highly stimulated platforms, and there's just no chance. You're going to lose. The boys are going to come in, and so what I see happen once you get those girls into high school is girls will end up going over to boys' houses, and then they'll sit there and watch the boys' game, or they'll jump in and kind of try, and it's like this parallel dating world. Where, it ends with some sort of sexual event. And then the girls come back and say, wait, like, is that how it goes? So there's a lot of very different social interactions. And the psychology of it is that girls aren't being taught what real self-confidence and self-control is on these platforms. They're literally rewarded for putting themselves out there in the most unedited and sexualized way.
Well, and I'm working on a new book for next year called Your Brain is Always Listening. And I talk about the dragons from the past that still breathe fire on your emotional brain. And one of the dragons is called the less than dragon, or the inferior flawed dragon. And whenever they're on these sites, in fact, you actually said the more you were on the site.
Oh, it took me 5 minutes. So I'm not even a person who, I never scroll. I don't have time. I barely go on because I've got my own platforms. That's the most amount of time I have to go on them is to answer questions, and I get off, right? Because we've got professional platforms, professional pages. But for some reason, it was Christmas. I was shopping. And so I was doing some Christmas shopping. I don't like the mall. I hate the mall, actually. So I do all my shopping online, and somehow I saw something and clicked on it, and then I found myself scrolling, and it took 5 minutes before I was like feeling awful about myself. And I'm like, wait, I know better. But I had to kick my own butt because I'm like, I know better. And I find, all of a sudden I'm looking at these women that I actually know personally. They're beautiful women, but they look perfect. And I'm like, what is happening right now? Like, why do I feel so awful? Why do I suddenly feel like I need to go visit the plastic surgeon after 5 minutes of scrolling? It's crazy.
Right.
And I think that actually may be driving this epidemic rise of suicide in teenage girls, because they feel inferior. They feel flawed when they look in the mirror and then they see what are on these social media sites.
My daughter says it all the time. She's like, I don't understand why all these girls, right now she's homeschooled, but the school she went to, she's like, why do they all look so perfect? I'm like, honey, supermodels don't look like supermodels. You need to remember that. Like, supermodels don't look like supermodels. So in my generation, it was airbrushing. Now it's Photoshop? Photoshop.
Yeah, Photoshop. And they are basically layered into the programs and platforms that they're using. So
they're filters.
They don't even have to work at it. It's just done automatically for them. Yeah.
Craziness. All right. I distracted us. Psychology of technology. What else comes to mind when you think of that, Lisa?
I think that we need to recognize that today it isn't a choice between one or the other. I think that a lot of people are talking to me about kind of mental health or mental wellness. Yeah, and technology, and do I have to choose? We don't have an option anymore. So we're going to have to figure out, how do we have a positive interface that supports our psychology with technology versus harms it? So exactly, Tana, like you just said, like, how do we manage our own understanding and see ourselves going down that slippery slope and understand what our psychology is? Because we all have sprinkles of something. So if you have OCD, or if you have a little bit of anxiety or depression, like, you're going to get triggered in ways through these devices or these platforms. So the psychology of understanding that technology is constantly influencing us, and that really, even if you're not on it, and there was a great study the London School of Economics did, and they went in and they had 140,000 students, and all they did simply was take the cell phone, the personal device, away from the kids. And what they found was their grades went up on average almost 8%. So literally, the kids still had technology in the classroom. They were still using it to learn, but they didn't have personal devices. So it tells you that the research that shows that we lose about 40% of our attention when we have a device in front of us is really accurate. So the psychology of that is understanding, all right, in that 40%, what is the psychology being impacted or influenced by? Is it, oh, I hope that I get that text from that person, or I'm wondering what this job is going to come in as, or I wonder, so what is the psychology of that unknown, even when we're not connected to our technology? So that's important.
Yeah, no, the incidence of ADD has more than doubled since the early 90s. And is it a Ritalin deficiency syndrome, or is it our attention has been hijacked? And it sounds like you're saying in a lot of cases, children and adults, their attention has actually been hijacked. All right, stay with us. When we come back, we're going to talk about how parents can protect their children from online predators, but also companies that are really going after the mind share of your child.
Yeah.
Stay with us. We're here with Dr. Lisa Strohman, a psychologist, attorney, author, has a great TED Talk. We also did a podcast with her before. We loved her so much. We wanted her back. We're talking about technology and kids, really not just kids, it's technology in all of us. And how do we protect ourselves? People get so excited to get their new Apple device or their Samsung
or their gaming devices
or their iPad
and their gaming devices. But a lot of, people don't even think about this, but people communicate with other people through these gaming devices and certainly through all of the online platforms.
Well, in isolation. So I've seen a lot of Asperger kids over the years, and the only social interactions they have are on the gaming devices.
Kind of scary.
And so
that's
how do
fun.
parents protect the kids from, yes, the predators you talked about, but also these international corporations that are desperate
they're sort of
to increase the mind share that, we talked about Kellogg's and sugar cereals, and you've talked for a long time. Well, where do they put the most expensive cereals?
They put the most, not the most expensive ones. The lower third shelves in the grocery store are the most expensive for companies to purchase that share of that real estate in grocery stores. Why? Because your kid will throw a full-blown temper tantrum if they see something and you don't buy it. And that is the reason.
And so they're going after
the babies.
Stomach share.
Yeah.
So they want heightened stomach share. But what we're talking about with these technology companies is they want mind share. They want to plant their company in this child's brain, whether it's Apple or Google or Microsoft or FaceTime.
And it seems like one of the ways, we need to let her speak, but it seems like one of the ways they do this, maybe you can speak to this, is they play on our desire to keep our kids safe. I know that's why I have it, right? And the kids in my family know that phone isn't really for you. Yes, you use it for things other than for us. But if I find that you are not on my Life 360 app for any reason, or your phone's not charged when you're out, you need to be home. Like, that phone's for me. You don't answer it, you don't have it. That's the rule. So that's the reason they have the phone. The other stuff is sort of secondary, but I feel like companies play on that. Like, we can keep our kids safe.
Well, and you feel safe as a parent, certainly, when you're doing the right thing and you're using apps that are monitoring your kids and things like that. And so what it officially does is it creates kind of a security for parents to feel like it's okay to let them kind of go in here without the education and without the information, because it's like, well, it's a reputable company. Like, we all are using Gmail. We're using these platforms to, communicate with one another. I think right now in the COVID situation where we've got kids quarantined and millions upon millions of kids are at home, they don't have the 6 hours, 7 hours of social time, maybe sometimes 9 hours a day if they're involved in sports or music or things like that. So we're starting to put them online in order to interface with one another. And what I'm seeing is that you're getting servers hijacked left and right. You're getting companies that are looking at, how do I create an opportunity in this? And I think that, Tom, we were talking about the predators on how they're going after this. They're literally going and hoping and assuming that you're going to let them go into these platforms and feel pretty safe about it, because, honestly, everybody else is right now. And we want our kids to be social. And it's not unlike our kids tantruming in the store. Like, how many times do you have to be asked, I just need to go on for 30 minutes. Just give me 15 more minutes, extend my time. It's really hard to parent today with technology and understand what the dangers are when maybe you didn't live in the world that I lived in, which was behind the scenes in the FBI looking at 150 agents that were working 24 hours a day, pretending to be young kids, and never unsolicited. And that was 2 decades ago. Now, internet crimes units, ICAC, internet crimes against children units, are in every city. And what you have to remember is that literally, like the playgrounds or the bus stops, or, I was always terrified because we had multiple cases of the ice cream men where kids would line up, right? And all they'd have to do is grab their belt loop and shove them in a freezer and drive off. You'd never hear a scream. So those days are over. Nowadays, you've got kids going into these platforms that are bored, that are curious, that are needing social interaction, and they're finding availability to do that. And so that's what these online predators, like, who aren't necessarily always, I want to be really clear, they're not always the person in the dark hoodie that you think looks super sketchy, and you can tell right off the bat that it's not somebody you want your kid talking to. I mean, we have people who are teachers, that are in law enforcement, that are in ministry.
Businessmen. Right.
So I think that it goes back to technology is the platform that allows people to have these sexual predilections, to explore that world, and kids are curious and they're going to have conversations with people. So, I put predators in two piles. I put the ones that are, there's a group that are intentionally going after our kids, the cappers that go out and capture photos, like really lure, groom, and do that. And then I think that there's kind of this innocent predator, which sounds really weird coming out of my mouth, but they're really normal people that just have these desires and interests that are behaviorally inappropriate, that it feels like they can go into these worlds safely because it's behind a computer in a private area.
But does that grow? Does that often grow if they start that behavior? Then does it turn into something else?
I mean, I think we talked a little bit about this last time, and we had talked about doing one on pornography. I really think that we're growing a culture of young boys into pedophiles because we have such an early sexualization of young boys now. So average age is 8 of first porn exposure, and chronic use is at 11. So if you're, the same way a fetish attaches to, say, a tire, or to a shoe, or to feet, or things like that, these fetishes attach during these highly sexualized experiences for anyone. And so for young boys to have early exposure via technology and devices, I think we are going to be developing a culture of pedophiles because they're attaching that sexuality at such a young age to such a young population that's among them.
Yeah.
So what does it do to these young boys' brains? I mean, you're really talking about pre-adolescent development.
Yeah. Right.
What is that going to do for them developing a healthy sexual relationship as adults? It's really going to make it dramatically hard.
Incredibly hard, if not impossible. I think that you've nailed it on the head. I think that they don't know how to communicate in person. Nobody's looking at each other in the eye. I think that, we look at kids oftentimes and say, oh, they're just shy. And we're missing that level of anxiety, maybe that, technology-induced ADD, if you want to call it that. And we're looking at the outside as parents, and we don't really want to go in and say, sure, my 9-year-old has a sex addiction and that his anxiety is related to how awkward it must feel for him to be looking around sexually now at other people. That's not what's happening. Parents don't want to think of their little boy that way.
Right.
And so it's hard. It's understanding that, if you have a 9-year-old that's detaching from a mom specifically and is like all of a sudden saying, oh, please give me privacy and do these things, there's probably been an exposure that's happened. And there's things that are going through that child's brain. You have to sit down and talk about it. And that's really hard. Parents aren't as comfortable doing that.
Protect them from it. Does putting parental control on a child's phone protect them from early exposure to pornography?
I think it gives you a fighting chance. Because if you have a parent who's decided to put on parent monitoring, it tells me you have a parent that's thoughtful there. They're engaged and understand that there are things out there that we should be concerned about. And that, to me, is the number one thing. The monitoring part is hard, right? Because as a parent, we have busy parents. We have parents that don't know how to use the monitoring. We're not really sure if kids, I've got kids that are jailbreaking their phones left and right now, right, and they're disabling Life 360. So it looks like it's active and parents have no idea. There's all sorts of ways that kids can navigate around that. But if you've put that device or that monitoring system on their device, then you know that you've had that conversation with them. So it helps, but it is about having that conversation over and over again.
Yeah, when my daughter started middle school, there's a very large, she's homeschooled, there's a very large school that she was attending. It was 7th through 12th, which right there, I did not like 7th through 12th. I just was that bothered me. But she very open. She and I are very close. And she came home, and I had a sense it was not going to be good when she started a 7th through 12th school anyways. So I sort of prepared her for a lot of stuff. But I didn't realize that she came home and she saw most of the boys are looking at porn on their phones at school. And I was like, oh, she's like, no, it's just normal. It's normal. And so I'm like, no. So we had to have, I'm like, okay, there's so many things. I mean, we started from the beginning, went through all the problems with it. But I said, ultimately, honey, one of the biggest problems is that's going to be the expectation that they have for a female long-term girlfriend, for a wife. That's going to be what they expect. And that's not real. How do you ever measure up to that? It's ruining this whole generation of boys. It's ruining intimacy. It's ruining men cherishing women. It's ruining that, this idea that we are not perfect, but we love each other. That's not what it's about. And so they're starting this, but for it to be the norm, for them to be having, she's like, no, they just all walk around with it on their phones laughing and they think it's hilarious. And,
Yeah. And the porn challenges where they show each other it and try to get the most grotesque response and things like that. So it escalates it into areas that are like bestiality and it's just, and it's not normal, but you're that parent who's having that conversation, and not everybody has the comfort and doesn't really always know how to do that.
Yeah.
It's so important. I had a 14-year-old patient, and he was completely hooked on pornography. And when I had the parents, they sort of thought, well, it was normal and all the kids were doing that, which just horrified me. And he ended up going into a technology addiction program. And I think those are just going to increase as time goes on.
Yeah, no, it's sort of frightening that we're raising this generation that has these unrealistic views of people, relationships, what they're supposed to be like. And
and there's some evidence that actually blunts their prefrontal cortex development. And ultimately, pornography, like cocaine, wears out the brain's pleasure centers, and then it takes more and more to get the same dopamine response in the brain. So you're basically deadening the pleasure centers in the brain, and that's a disaster.
Right, and that's why it takes more and more to become stimulated. And one thing, you keep mentioning we should be having these talks with our kids, and I think a lot of parents have no clue how to have that talk or how far to go. I probably go to the opposite extreme. So I made my daughter watch documentaries on sex trafficking and I scared her to no end. Like I totally instilled an anxiety disorder because of the way I grew up. I didn't even grow up with technology, but I grew up in such an unhealthy environment that I'm like, you sort of live in a bubble and you need to know what the real world is like. Because she's like, nothing's going to happen to me. I live in Newport. I'm like, okay, we need to have a chat. And so I burst her bubble.
And now, because my wife is a prepper, I am never going to, because I'm like, what bad thing is going to happen? We live in Southern California.
Told you so.
Yes, now you can't find toilet paper and paper towels.
I have toilet paper. And I didn't have to go order it because I already had it.
You have a childhood like that. Like, we were totally fine.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think knowing how to initiate that conversation, knowing how far we should go would be important.
Well, let's talk about it when we come back. When we're here, we'll continue with Dr. Lisa Strohman and her website. You can learn all about her work, dcakids.org. Stay with us.
Welcome back. We are still here with Dr. Lisa Strohman, and she is just so fascinating. So, Lisa, you're an attorney. You're an expert on internet crimes. You worked for the FBI, and we're just having this great conversation on kids. And our last episode was on predators and how you can prepare your kids. I love how we ended it. It was talking about preparing kids for the real world, sort of what's going to happen as they enter into junior high and even sometimes earlier, what they're going to encounter with other kids, what they're going to see on their phones. And that's something we were talking about. How can parents initiate this conversation? Now, I'm a trauma nurse. I'm pretty intense. So I threw my kid into the deep end pretty fast and, pulled up crazy articles and pictures and made her watch sex trafficking documentaries and scared her half to death. But that's probably not what you're going to recommend. So how would you recommend we do it?
Well, I think that there's probably like the Goldilocks zone, maybe, where you can be in the middle and it's just right. I think that when you look at what kids are doing, and I think that you can see that they live in this kind of secret world now in their devices. And so you have to really, to me, love them enough to have an expectation that they're going to go down rabbit holes that will uncover things that you don't want them to see. And that's the most important part as a parent. It's the sex talk that most of us never got because our parents just had no idea how to have it. And then we handed it over to the schools and they did an awful job at trying to figure out what it was and the messaging that they gave and not taking into consideration the developmental issues. So, where the kids are, what their needs are. So I think that with technology, understanding that developmentally they're immature, right? They don't have full frontal lobe executive function, the ability to weigh right from wrong, long-term and short-term decisions. And then you hand them this magical access into the internet that allows them to just kind of traipse along. And so I tell parents, one of the things that I would say is for you to really recognize that giving them access, whether it's a personal device or a home computer or whatever, it is literally like dropping them off on a strange street that you've never been on, and hoping that they don't walk down the street and find somebody bad. And so if you're not comfortable with that as a parent, you have to have a conversation and you have to literally describe and create a child, whatever your child's age is, but a description of what that world is like. So if your daughter's going, say, to Miami and there's heavy trafficking and there's a lot of prostitution and things that are happening that's going to be in front of her. Vegas comes to mind, having been there multiple times for sporting events with my kids. It's like, you better have that conversation before you get there because you don't have choice once it's in front of you. Right. And so that's curiosity with kids. And so that's one of the things that I think you need to take into consideration as a parent.
Yeah, no, my daughter, after she got done threatening to call Child Protective Services for me making her listen to all of this stuff and scare her half to death, she's like, I don't think you're supposed to be traumatizing me. I need therapy. But the reason that I did that was because maybe you can answer, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. Because we travel a lot internationally, number one, and she goes with us, right? That's a big thing. But also, I didn't trust the fact that just because we're monitoring her phone, I know most parents aren't monitoring their phones. I know parents who buy alcohol for parties. So based on that fact alone, it doesn't matter how much I monitor her phone. When she's with her friends, their phones are not monitored. Okay, so rather than just relying on phone monitoring, I wanted to rely on, is my daughter smart enough when she sees something to actually, for it to trigger, oh, this isn't good. This is scary. This is not a good thing. And so I needed to instill that in her. I wanted that voice in her to sort of wake up and go, it's not nice, honey. The world is not just, it's not a fairy tale. So there's no Prince Charming at the end of that rope. And I wanted to be sure that when I'm not there to monitor her, that she can still see the truth. So Perfect. I don't know.
I mean, that's the Goldilocks area. I mean, that's empowering children. And my mission and passion has always been, we empower our kids to understand the rules. So if they don't understand, say they're going on, specifically one of my hot buttons is the live streaming apps, and TikTok is another really great example. TikTok used to be Musical.ly. Musical.ly was highly trafficked through with predators and people on there that go in there, they look at these videos, they identify themselves, they create fake accounts, they start messaging with the kids. And it's like picking off the weak zebra in the pack because it's playing upon their vulnerability to need that attention, to want to know that they're good. And again, we've taught them what a good zebra looks like, right? Like we teach them, like if somebody's nice to you. And so they're very trained to go into these platforms and pull that data and do that stuff. So I think it's really important to teach them the realities of it and to understand what the rules are. Because we would never sit down and play, say, Monopoly. And if the three of us sat down and I was like, let's play, we all pretty much understand we all get the $200 when we pass go, and we all get a certain amount when we start. But if I told you I get $2,000 every time I pass go, and you guys only get $200, you would say I'm not going to play. So one of the things that I'm very strongly an advocate of, and what I do anytime I go and talk to families or kids, is teach them the rules. So I pull the privacy policies off of these apps, and I go through them and I highlight those areas. I put it in a slideshow. I go through and I talk about it, and I was like, here's what this means. And I basically take the legalese, because nobody's reading the 23 pages of agreements that we're downloading, and I translate it for kids, depending on whatever age they are. And I was like, here's what they do. They own your content. They can redistribute it anytime. If you think it's cool to work at the FBI, or I've done some cool stuff in my life, I'm pretty sure had I been on TikTok when I was 12 or 13, I wouldn't have had that opportunity, right? Because I can't control that data once I give it to them. And then I teach them, how do you pull it back? How do you clean that up? And so for parents, monitoring is part of it. But you do have to go in and you have to be honest with your kids, and you have to trust them. They're good. Kids want to be good. Right. And they want you to be happy with them. They ultimately do, but they don't recognize the difference between right and wrong if we don't tell them.
Right. So one thing I tell Chloe is, I trust you're not. So let me tell you why I'm nervous. And so I trust that you do the right thing, but you could end up doing the wrong thing, not even knowing it. So
is this what Digital Citizen Academy does?
It's 100% why I founded it, was how do I take this from family to family, kid to kid, and how do I create a scalable model that allows families and kids to take back the control and to understand what those rules are. And I think that's so important.
You just mentioned you take that 23 pages, you boil it down to something that a kid will understand. Do you have something like that in a book or in a slideshow that, I would love to see that. Yeah. So do you have that written anywhere?
So I haven't, I'm trying to think, we're just finished the copy on our second book. I don't think I don't know if I have an image of it in there. I'm for sure one of my webinars has it. And so I'm playing catch up of I've avoided putting a lot of stuff on technology or on platforms and things like that. But I'm starting to figure out, how do I create this in a sustainable, ongoing mechanism. So creating a YouTube channel, how do I put these little tidbits out? I just found out from another app, some of the things that they were doing, and going on there and checking ages and how they're live streaming and how they're sharing content and data, and they're monetizing it through these microtransactions. So of course, the minute I popped in to do a webinar, there was an underage kid on there, and she was getting, gummy, or they create these silly stickers, and they're worth money through PayPal. And so she's literally becoming this online prostitute for unknown people. And I can tell she's in a room, hiding behind a door and talking very quietly because she doesn't want her parents to know. So how do I alert people because they come out every day? So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out a way to get that information out on a regular basis. Because to me, catching those people and unveiling the truth behind it, we have to do it together, because otherwise it's never going to stop, and we're going to lose all of our kids to this really unfair, addictive potential that these platforms are giving.
Well, we need your work more than ever before. So Thank you for being
so
with us.
Interesting.
And for people who want to learn more, dcakids.org. They can learn more. And also, and I'll have you spell it, is it drlisastrohman.com? They can find out more about your practice and so on. So spell that for everybody.
So Dr. DRLISASTROHMAN.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Lisa. What a joy
Thank
to
you
see you
so
again.
much. It's so interesting as always.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're considering coming to Amen Clinics or trying some of the brain healthy supplements from BrainMD, you can use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com or a 10% discount on all supplements at brainmdhealth.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.